Page 92, Musette. It's another golden oldie from the 1700s. At the top of page 92, they're talking about the 16th note, a new note. We've had quarter notes, half notes, and eighth notes, whole notes and eighth. Okay. Well, now we're going to split the eighth note in half. That's the 16th note. Notice how the number gets bigger, the note gets faster. A 16th note has 2 bars or 2 flags on it, where an 8th note had 1, 16th note has 2. And they give you examples. And this book uses the same counting I do. There's different ways of counting these, but I like this counting. 1 E and 2 E and we kind of used this counting before when we had a cut time thing with 8th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a. Well, now we get 4/4 time, or in this case 2/4 time with 16th notes. It's the same counting. 1 E and a 2 E and a, except now there's 16th notes. But you can read and count through the examples shown. I like to use the music. At the beginning of this, you in the right hand, you have that 1 E and 2 E and 1 E and 2 E and 1 E and 2 E and 1 E and 2 E and. It's really all it is. It's really not a tricky thing. It's not complicated. You're just counting a lot of 1 E andas. You're not necessarily saying it all the time. You're thinking it. Let's just go through a few things one hand at a time. Again with the right hand. You have legato and staccato. We have this contrast going, and this is wonderful. By all means, do it. There's no pedal in it because it would just get in the way. So at the beginning, you have legato, and then after a little bit of legato, you get staccatos. It's like a statement and an answer. This is the statement. This is the answer. Then on page 93 goes into a different kind of melody here. Remember the 8th note there is staccato. Now the trick here, what people will do, including me, is when we get something like the first measure of page 93 on those, we will tend to accent the staccato. Don't do that, please. Unless there's an accent sign there or it falls on a main beat that is accented naturally, don't accent the staccato. So the accent, there's a natural accent on the C sharp on each of them, not the staccato. Second measure, it's ba, ba, it's not ba, ba. So be careful on those. Third measure over. I think they made a mistake here, my opinion. Look at the page 93, first line, last measure, right hand. They slurred the whole measure. That tells you to do it this way. But they put staccatos in for the 8th notes here. You can't slur it and staccato both. Which do you want? Well, it depends. If it is an error and they only meant to slur up to the first 8th note, you'd play it that way. If they really intend that slur to go all the way across, then what you do on those staccato notes is you just separate them. It's a long staccato. I don't know which they meant. Typically, when I play this, I staccato those notes. Then the weird stuff comes on line 2 in the right hand. They're all 8th notes. There's some tied notes, but no big deal. There's still 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. It's the staccato. It's the articulation. Slur staccato, slur staccato. Ugh. Listen. So what's the articulation? Because it is important. It's ba ba ba. It's kind of syncopated. You know, it's really cool the way the way Bach has done this. Then after that, it's all similar stuff that what we had before. It's just a different melody. Third line, of course, you have a D sharp added in, and then Watch the fingering. And the third line down, the last note, that quarter note, hold it out the full beat. Don't cut that short. You have to cut it a little bit short because you got to get your hand 2 octaves higher to the A. But don't cut it any shorter than you have to, because that should be. It's like a final, yeah. That's about all I had to say about the right hand. In the left hand, for the most part, you have just these 8th notes. Bump, bump, just kind of bounce off the keys. So it's in harmony. Actually, it is doubling what the melody is doing. It's an octave apart. Not a lot to say about left hand. It's pretty straightforward. In the second line on page 93, when the right hand has these slur staccato nonsense going on, the left hand is all staccato. That just adds to the complexity of it, because work that out a little bit at a time. Dynamic wise, yes, the dynamics here are important. Bach didn't put them in, some editor did. Bach didn't put in dynamics per se. It just wasn't done back then. As a musician, you're expected to know how to interpret it. So we're going to use their dynamics, and they're all over the place. It's important that you do that. What I want to point out on them is, again, that second line on page 93. You're starting out soft, and there's a little note. Crescendo, poco a poco. That's Italian again, which means get louder little by little. So you're going to use the whole line to go from soft, piano, to loud, forte. In the next line, it's forte. Well, if you don't plan this out, you're going to get forte by the second measure. Too soon. And if you're forte by then, you got no place to go. So plan it out in advance. I do it by measure when it's this many. So I can say the first measure is soft. At about the middle of the second measure, I'm going to go to medium soft, just a little louder. And then on the third measure, like the last note of the third measure, I'm going to go to a medium loud. And then I can get loud in the next line. So it's just stay soft. Now a little louder. Now medium loud. Now loud. You have to experiment with that and plan it out in advance. It's effective when it's done right, and it doesn't really do anything at all when it's done wrong. The listener, when they're listening to this, they have no idea you spent all that time figuring out all that junk. They just like what they're hearing, and that's the whole point. You make it look easy, even though you've really worked on it. Let's try this out very, very slowly because of the 16th note. So we are going to take the repeats. You see the repeat signs on page 93? So we're playing page 93 twice. Now the tempo on this is allegro con brio. That means fast with brilliance. We're not going to go fast with brilliance. We're going to go slow with boring. I want to show you a little thing we do in piano sometimes that helps us in getting the hands moved. Yes, we do practice hand movements, but it's tricky on page 92. It happens in both lines, going from the second to the third measure. You're here in this position in the second measure, but you got to go here in the third measure. Both hands are moving. That gets tricky because you don't have a lot of time. There's no rests or anything. You got to be right there. So one thing we can do is we take advantage of the staccato here. In the left hand, I play the staccato, and once I've played that staccato, I'm done. I can move right then while the right hand is still going on. And then all I got to do is think about the right hand moving. So I'm not moving both hands at once. I'm moving one hand at a time, and you practice that. So the second and third measures. And that makes it a little easier, and we use these little things to get the hands to move. So take advantage of that stuff. If it weren't staccato, we'd have a harder time to do that. What I do in the left hand, if it weren't, is I just cross over and get the third here, and then I got to concentrate on the right hand. But because it's staccato, I can just move the hand. I want to explain a little bit about using metronomes, because when we start getting into this kind of stuff, we have to adjust things, and I already have in some previous videos. Typically, you would put a metronome on whatever the key signature says you're counting. So if the key signature says 2/4 time, I would put the metronome on quarter notes. So it's beating quarter notes. Well, when you get to the ranges, that doesn't work real well. It's hard to follow. Because if it's really slow, and you have one beat now, and then a little bit later you have another beat, that's hard to follow. So in a metronome, we would split that up and maybe beat 1/8 notes or 16th notes. It depends on the speed. Because we have 16th notes, I'm going to split the metronome up, and I have it set on 70, but it is beating 1/8 notes. So if you look at it, it's 1 and 2 and. Then the 16th notes are going to go 1 E and they're twice that fast. So to demonstrate just the first couple of measures, it's like this. 1. Hopefully that's not too fast for you. Or you work it on your own to try and build it to that speed, and then play it along with me. So that's what we're going to do. There's 2 beats in the measure, so I'll give us 2 counts to start. Let's try this out. No pedal, of course, because it bounces along. You know, it's staccato and legato, we got to have all that. 1 and ready, go.